Hey guys, this is Jer from the Curse of Oak Island podcast. Recently, on our episode 37, we were getting to the bottom of Season 8, Episode 13, The Fellowship of the Ring Bowl. This, of course, is from the Curse of Oak Island. Now, there's some things they continually perpetrate on the show, one being that 7 people must die. And that seems to be a bit more, legend, closer to the legend on the scale as opposed to closer to truth. Also, I've heard from time to time the idea that Samuel Ball was one of the original discoverers. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. On episode 13, Season 8, The Fellowship of the Ring Bowl, they mention a document where this first comes into play, this idea that Samuel Ball is indeed one of the original 3 discoverers. And they say it comes from the history of the county of Lunenburg. Well, I went down a rabbit hole, and I did find the document. I put a link on our website, so you can check it out. It's rather lengthy, so I chose not to read the whole thing on our recent episode. But I'm going to read it here, and you can see it as well. And it starts off, the history of the county of Lunenburg. I'm on document, I guess, number 300, at the very tail end. And it talks about Oak Island. It says it has become famous for the searches from time to time made for the treasure supposed to have been buried by the noted pirate Captain Kidd. The first settlers were John McClellan, Daniel McGinnis, father of Mrs. Thomas Whitford of Chester. One of the earlier residents was, of course, Samuel Ball. That's our first mention. A colored man who came from South Carolina, where he had been a slave to a master whose name he adopted. His wife had been a domestic in the house of Treasurer Wallace at Halifax. Their union is thus recorded in his family Bible. Samuel Ball and Mary Ball was married 1795. Sick. The farm of 36 acres on which he lived and which he cleared is now occupied by Mr. Isaac Butler, who resided with him. Silhouettes of Mrs. Ball and Mr. Ball, or I suppose just Mrs. Ball, and others are seen in one of the rooms of the house built by Mr. Ball. He died there December 14th, 1845, aged 81 years. Cheers to you, sir. He was known as a good man. The other occupants of the island are James McGinnis and Enos Yodri. The pits hereinafter referred to were dug on the farm formerly owned by John Smith, who was born in Boston, Massachusetts, August 20th, 1775, and died on the island after a residence there of 71 years on September 29th, 1857. He brought up his children very respectably. His daughter, Mary, lived in the family to which the writer belongs for 16 years. And he takes pleasure in here mentioning her name, remembering with gratitude her faithful attention in the days of his childhood at Chester and afterwards at Dartmouth. Several accounts have been given to the writer of work from time to time done on the island, and some of it has himself witnessed. The leading facts are embodied in the following condensed statement from lengthy papers published December 20th, 1863, and subsequently by a member of the Oak Island Association, who said that more than a century before, an old man died in what was known as the British colony of New England, who on his deathbed confessed to having been one of the crew of the famous Captain Kidd, and assured those who attended him in the last moments that he had many years previously assisted that noted pirate and his followers in burying over 2 millions of money beneath the soil of a secluded island east of Boston. This news having been widely spread, many searches were made, but all in vain. 3 men, Smith McGinnis, grandfather of James McGinnis, and Vaughan, emigrated from New England to Chester. Smith and McGinnis took up land on Oak Island, and Vaughan settled on the adjacent mainland. McGinnis one day discovered a spot that gave evidence of having been visited by someone of many good years earlier. Notice, as I step away from the text here, Samuel Ball was mentioned, but it then later goes on to say 3 men, Smith, McGinnis, and Vaughan. Smith, McGinnis, and Vaughan. This is shortly after it talks about Samuel Ball. I mean, Ball is certainly brought up as one of the original inhabitants, one of the earliest residents, but it doesn't put Ball there at the discovery in this account. And again, I'm on 302 of the history of Lunenburg. Continuing. A good many years earlier, there had been cuttings away of the forest, and oak stumps were visible. One of the original oaks was standing with a large forked branch extending over the old clearing. to the forked part of this branch by means of a tree nail connecting the fork in a small triangle was attached an old tackle block. McGinnis made known his find to his neighbors. Next day, the three visited the place. On taking the block from the tree, it fell to the ground and went to pieces. They found the remains of a road, the tree to the western shore of the island, and they concluded that if Kidd had buried money, it was probably here, I'm guessing. The ground over which the block had been settled and formed a hollow. They cleared away the young trees and removed the surface soil for about 2 feet, when they struck a tier of flagstones, which they found different from the island stones, and concluded that they had been brought from the vicinity of Gold River. We've heard that on the show. On removing these, they saw they were entering an old pit that had been filled up. The mouth was 7 feet in diameter, and the sides were tough, hard clay. But the earth which had been used in filling was loose and easy to be removed. 10 feet lower was a tier of oak logs, tightly attached to the sides, and the earth below them had settled nearly 2 feet. The logs were very much decayed on the outside. Removing these, they went 15 feet further down. To get below this, they required help, but none seemed willing to assist. About 15 years afterwards, Simon Lins of Onslow visited Chester and saw Vaughan, to whom his father was related. And the next day they went to the place, and as a result, he and many of his friends with tools and provisions came to the island, and were joined by Smith, McGinnis, and Vaughan. Again, that's the original three. They name them again. No mention yet of Ball. That was the previous paragraphs before they started talking about the discovery. The pit was found to have caved in, and mud had settled to the bottom. On taking this away, they came to the 3 sticks which had been put in the mud by the 3 first men on leaving off work. They went on and struck a second tier of logs like those first found. 10 feet lower, they came to charcoal. 10 feet below it to putty. Further down to a flagstone about 2 feet long and 1 foot wide, with rudely cut letters and figures, which they could not decipher. The engraved side was down, which I find interesting. That, of course, is the fabled 90-foot stone. On reaching a depth of 90 feet, the earth in the center became softened. The water began to show itself. At 93 feet, it increased, and they took out 1 tub of water, 2 of earth. Night coming on, they, as usual, probed the bottom with a crowbar to see if they could strike anything. At the depth of 98 feet, 5 feet below where the bar entered, they met a hard, impenetrable substance bound by the sides of the pit. They expected the mystery to be solved in the morning, but on returning, they found 60 feet of water, and their bailing buckets failed to lessen the depth. They discontinued the work and sent a committee to Mr. Mosier of Newport, considered the best man for such purpose in the province, to provide a way for removing the water. He prepared a pump at a cost of, looks like 80 pounds, and it was lowered to the depth of 90 feet. But before the water reached the surface, it burst. Robert Archibald, Esquire, uncle to the late Master of the Rolls, then had charge. In the following spring, a new shaft was sunk to the depth of 110 feet. And water then came in inside. I'm guessing it was 65 deep. Water came in initially, it was 65 feet deep. In 1848, work was resumed. The old pit was reopened, and 12 days afterward, the men were down to 86 feet. On a certain Saturday evening, everything was so far satisfactory, but on returning from morning service at Chester on the following day, there was 60 feet of water in the pit, and level with that in the bay. A great deal of additional work was done. The water rose in a new pit to the same height as the old one. In 1861, a new shaft was made, but the men were driven out by the coming water and mud. Now, continuing on here a little bit, again, I think this does prove that Samuel Ball was not there. He's mentioned right near there, but it does say those 3, and it mentions them several times. I'm going to continue reading here. In 1863, further work was performed, but it was found impossible to keep the water out. The work was, after all, carried on by Halifax members of the company under special agreement with the association. A new shaft was sunk, and there was confidence in ultimate success, but no discovery of treasure was made. The writer above referred to stated that he was for 15 years a member of the Oak Island Association, occasionally actively engaged at the works on the island, and thus gained information which enabled him to write with confidence on the subject. From all he saw, with what he believed in the experience of others, he had no doubt that the, quote, money pit and the drains on the island were purely works of art, constructed at a very early period in the history of the county, but for what purpose he could not say, and as to whether Kidd's buried treasure lies at the bottom of the money pit, or whether, as more believe, it does not, He did not feel it safe to offer an opinion. Works of art. I've never seen an artist shape. I mean, I suppose you could talk about the Nazca lines and say that's works of art, but interesting theory. 60 men and 30 horses have been at one time engaged on Oak Island. Many years ago, a day was named when all who should visit the island would see Kidd's treasure brought to the surface. Schooner and boatloads of people gathered from all directions. An old German, looking at the work, said, "The deeper they dig, the deeper it sinks." Parties from abroad have continued the search at intervals, and as recently as 1892, 1893 new pits were dug. Those who were employed in one of them were told that the ground would cave in, but they were not inclined to believe it. They soon had an indication of the till, and had been out only about 5 minutes, with several cartloads fell in. This ended the attempt they made, and the party left the island. Another pit was after all was dug, but not to any great depth after this was dug. Later workings with others are said to have been prompted by the dreams of a man in the eastern part of the country to whom certain spirits appeared, by whom he was taken to the island and shown the long coveted deposits of gold and silver. There's, some other mentions about Oak Island here, but again, I think it is interesting. You can check out more if you like. Again, just follow the link on the bottom of our website for episode 37. You'll be able to find that. And I think it does dispel the fact that Samuel Ball was one of the original three. Not to say he didn't find something on the island, not to say that somehow he was able, as a born slave who freed himself at age 11 and, died a wealthy man with 36 plus acres on Oak Island and other places, a cabbage farmer. Not to say his story isn't amazing and a man to be admired. Just saying, I don't think he was one of the original three. I'll leave it up to you if you disagree with me. Send us some chats. You can find out all about our social media links on our homepage, the Oak Island Podcast. I will catch you on the flip side.